With around 65 submarines in its arsenal, Russia is one of the world's greatest undersea threats. And Russia knows it. The country uses its submarines to intimidate enemies, knowing that those enemies know that a submarine, and perhaps one that can launch nuclear missiles, could be lurking nearby. It's all about power projection. But what happens when that power is found wanting? Russia just found out. Vladimir Putin is humiliated again as a Russian submarine breaks down in NATO's backyard. Worse yet for Russia's leader, that breakdown reveals that his country's navy is descending into a shambles. On September 28, the Economic Times was among the first outlets to report that one of Russia's Kilo-class diesel-electric submarines had broken down in Mediterranean waters. The Novorossiysk, which the outlet says is part of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, had been deployed in the direction of the Mediterranean Sea on combat duties. Though it isn't clear precisely what those duties were, it no longer matters. Russia's submarine has become a lame duck. A severe technical issue has left the sub dead in the water. That alone would be bad enough. However, that technical issue supposedly involves a potentially massive fuel leak that means Russia's stricken submarine could be on a time limit. If it isn't repaired soon, the sub could explode, claiming the lives of its 52 personnel while sinking the 242-foot submarine for good. Repairs simply aren't going to happen. The Economic Times says that the submarine has surfaced in the Strait of Gibraltar and that nobody on board is going to be able to fix the issue. That may be because there's a lack of qualified specialists on board who could solve such a catastrophic problem. But even if such a specialist were on the Novorossiysk, it wouldn't matter. The submarine doesn't contain the parts needed to fix the issue. That means Russia is in a race against time to send people in to save its malfunctioning submarine before it explodes. More information about the nature of the malfunction comes from the Russian Telegram channel VCHK OGPU. As reported by TVP World, this is a Russian Telegram channel that has supposedly received information from unnamed sources indicating how dire the submarine situation is for Russia right now. Due to damage in the fuel system, fuel is leaking directly into the hold. There are no spare parts for repairs or qualified specialists on the submarine, and the crew is unable to fix the malfunctions, the channel reports. Presumably, this means fuel is leaking all over whatever cargo the submarine has on board. The small amount of good news for the Russian crew is that the leaking fuel is likely diesel. Though flammable, this fuel has a flash point of 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is high enough that it's unlikely that ambient conditions inside the submarine are going to lead it to igniting. Still, the risk is there, especially if the leaking fuel is exposed to a spark or other sort of flame. Though slower to ignite than gasoline or kerosene, the HI Excavations explains diesel does burn, and when it does, the flames are harder to put out than they would be for either of the other two fuels mentioned. That's in conditions where firefighters can reach the inferno. If the diesel inside the submarine ignites, it won't go out again until the hold is flooded with water due to the Russian sub sinking. We also can't ignore the risk posed by so much diesel fuel flooding into an enclosed space. Presumably, Russia's submarine personnel have sealed off the Novorossiysk's cargo hold to contain the leak, but if anyone dared to venture inside, they'd end up breathing in fumes that can cause dizziness, headaches, and drowsiness, according to the UK Health Security Agency. Prolonged exposure is even worse. Breathing in large amounts of diesel fumes can result in coma, loss of muscle control, heart and lung problems. Those in the Novorossiysk better hope they can contain the fuel leak in the cargo hold. If they can't, that fuel may claim their lives long before it ignites. Sealing the hold may not be the solution, then, as the VCHK OGPU Telegram channel explains per TVP World. The serious accident has caused other problems as well. The accumulated fuel in the hold is an explosive hazard. The source believes the crew has no choice but to start pumping out the hold directly into the sea, it says. Disregarding the environmental problems this course of action would create, pumping fuel out into the sea obviously means that fuel can no longer be used to keep the submarine running. Plus, you never know, more activity around the fuel could lead to it igniting as it's being pumped out, which could spell disaster for the Novorossiysk's crew. This submarine incident is a powder keg that could explode at any moment. The fact that it's happening near the Mediterranean Sea, which is essentially the backyard for several NATO nations, takes this from a potential tragedy for Russia into an outright humiliation. The very vessel that was supposed to maintain its position under the waves to threaten NATO's coastal Mediterranean countries is now on the verge of being lost forever. Some of you may be getting flashbacks to the past right now. That isn't surprising. This isn't the first time that a Russian submarine has encountered such major trouble while in the water. There are some disturbing parallels to the Kursk submarine disaster, which occurred in 2000. Putin's first year as Russia's president was marred by this disaster, in which a faulty torpedo propulsion system resulted in explosions that eventually sank the Oscar II-class submarine. All 118 of those on board died. That incident was remarkable, not just because it happened in the first place, but as Newsweek notes, Putin went out of his way to hinder international efforts to save the Kursk's crew. So worried was Putin about exposing Russian nuclear secrets that he essentially denied help from any other country. Russia was supposed to solve the problem on its own. It didn't. The situation right now with the Novorossiysk is different because the leaking fuel hasn't ignited yet. But if it does, we could end up seeing a repeat of one of the largest submarine disasters in modern history. Putin likely won't accept Western help if it's offered. He said no in 2000, back when Russia had a far better relationship with the West. Now, with the Ukraine war raging and NATO regarded by Russia as the enemy, Putin's humiliation would be complete if Russian Navy personnel were saved by NATO-aligned nations. Russia's leader will almost inevitably refuse help. And that means the Novorossiysk's crew may be doomed. This isn't the first major issue with the vessel that Russia has had to deal with in recent memory. United 24 media reports that another Russian vessel, specifically a Project 21631 Bayan-M missile corvette, named Vishny Volochyok, was recently severely damaged in the Azov Sea after colliding with a civilian tanker. The incident occurred on August 7th, with official Russian documents claiming that the damage was sustained during combat tasks, United 24 says. Later, photographs of the damaged ship surfaced, showing that visible structural damage had occurred to the Vishny Volochyok's hull. Russia's military later lied and claimed that not only was the ship still combat-ready, which it wasn't, the damage had been caused by a horde of Ukrainian drones. Of course, Russia would say that. Admitting that its naval personnel were incompetent enough to crash into a tanker is as embarrassing as the Novorossiysk being in such a terrible state of disrepair that its fuel system has malfunctioned. The whole situation is especially humiliating because the Novorossiysk seems to be a pretty important submarine for Russia. Powered by a pair of diesel generators and an electric drive, the Novorossiysk is capable of reaching a top speed of 17 knots underwater. That's pretty slow, and its range of between 6,000 and 7,500 nautical miles isn't especially impressive. Still, the submarine is a threat, thanks to having 18 torpedoes and the ability to launch missiles or mines, depending on how Russia wants to use it. It's also worth noting that the Novorossiysk isn't a particularly old submarine. Rather than being a Soviet-era relic, which would at least make it understandable, albeit not excusable, that it's in such a state of disrepair, the Novorossiysk was laid down on August 20, 2010, according to the Black Sea Fleet website. It entered service officially about 4 years later, meaning the sub only had about 11 years under its belt at the time of its malfunction. Russia has put the Novorossiysk to good use, threatening NATO nations in the recent past too. It was only in June 2025 that Russia deployed the submarine to the English Channel. United 24 reported on that incident, noting that the submarine appeared to have purposefully surfaced in that body of water, perhaps sending a message to both France and the UK that Russia could send its submarines to within striking distance of their territory. The UK deployed several ships, including a patrol vessel named HMS Mersey and a pair of helicopters, to observe the Novorossiysk during its English Channel escape. Eventually, the submarine, which was accompanied by a tugboat named the Yakov Grabelsky, left without a serious incident. The Novorossiysk's surfacing was seen as strange at the time, with the whole affair appearing to be a Russian signal to NATO. Nobody could have guessed that this same submarine, now in Mediterranean waters, would be practically disabled by a technical fault a few months later. We're telling you all of this to highlight that the Novorossiysk isn't a submarine that Russia knew was experiencing technical issues. It was actively deployed and being used to deliver threats to NATO, which is why it was in Mediterranean waters. Either Russia thought all was well with the submarine, or it knew that a problem was emerging, and it kept the sub at sea anyway. Whatever the cause, it doesn't really matter. The Novorossiysk is almost done for, and if Russia doesn't do something about it soon, the submarine will sink in NATO's backyard without NATO having to do a thing. Of course, this incident alone is embarrassing enough for Putin. Nobody was supposed to know where the Novorossiysk was operating. NATO might have had an idea, but the whole point of sending a submarine to the Mediterranean was to maintain an underwater threat that was unseen and could strike at any time. That threat being rendered useless is a massive problem for Putin. But even worse than the Novorossiysk seemingly being on its way to sinking is what this entire incident exposes about Russia's navy. It's in trouble, a lot of trouble. Lacking parts and being unable to conduct maintenance, Russia has been sending vessels out all over the world that many would argue should be docked somewhere for repairs. In June 2024, for instance, Russia suffered another submarine-based humiliation that showed just how much of a toll sanctions and the failures of Russia's navy to maintain its vessels were having. In that month, the National Interest reported that a Russian Yasin-M-class nuclear submarine named Kazan had docked in Havana, showing plenty of signs that it was worse for wear. Photos of the submarine were shared on LinkedIn by Capgemini IT firm managing consultant Maureen Marcus, who claimed that the submarine was falling apart as it visited Cuba. Its soundproofing panels are falling off, meaning the stealth sub is likely very loud underwater and lights up on sonar. Marcus said in an analysis of the pictures before implying that the submarine had better make it back to Russia quickly before it imploded, like the Kursk we discussed earlier. Marcus had a point. If parts were falling off the Kazan's exterior, what must the interior have looked like? Divers were at least trying to fix the issue, with Marcus adding that losing tiles is a problem that Western submarines face as well. Adhesive can only last for so long, after all, especially on a vessel that continuously compresses and expands due to the changing pressures when sailing underwater. Still, the fact that the Kazan was commissioned around 2001 and, according to the national interest, had been at sea for 6 years, suggests there may be a deeper problem relating to the quality of Russian submarine manufacturing. Russia has also heavily promoted the Kazan's trip to Cuba, as the national interest points out. The loss of panels won't impact operational capabilities, but other experts suggest it's just further proof that the Russian Navy does a fairly poor job of maintaining its submarines. Kazan was only commissioned in May 2001, and the trip to Cuba has been heavily promoted by the Kremlin, it says. So this was a submarine that was supposed to represent the best of what Russia has to offer. Panels falling off may have been inopportune, but it also suggests that Russia's best is a long way behind where it's supposed to be. Now, the maintenance problems hinted at by the Kazan images in 2024 could be coming home to roost for the Novorossiysk. In August 2025, Business Insider also indicated that Russia's naval problems don't just extend to its submarines. The country's entire navy is starting to be stretched thin, the outlet reported. The Black Sea Fleet, being so heavily battered by Ukraine, has played a role in this issue. Remember that the Novorossiysk is part of that fleet. If it's lost, as is a definite possibility, that will only add to the woes of a fleet that has already had a third of its vessels damaged or destroyed by Ukraine since Putin launched his invasion. However, the symbolic loss of yet another Black Sea Fleet vessel isn't as important as Russia losing a key port in the Mediterranean that may have been able to get help to the stricken Novorossiysk. Business Insider notes that the 2024 collapse of the Assad regime in Syria deprived Russia of a port that could have been used to send help. Russia provided military support to the Assad regime during the brutal conflict, and in exchange, it enjoyed a significant presence at Syria's Tartus naval facility on the Mediterranean Sea, Business Insider said. However, the change in Damascus has jeopardized the future of Moscow's operations at the strategic port. The outlet also spoke to Royal Netherlands Navy frigate HNLMS De Ruyter's Commodore Arjen Varnar, who emphasized how the loss of so much of the Black Sea Fleet, combined with Russia's Syria issue, has created some massive problems. Looking at what they're doing in the Mediterranean, losing a port there means losing logistical support, and that stretches the capabilities they have, which mainly come from this northern fleet, Varnar said. Granted, it's not the northern fleet that's being affected right now, but the Novorossiysk is in waters that would have been most easily accessible via the Syrian port, over which Russia no longer exercises control. If Russia could still use the port, it could send rescue ships through the Mediterranean Sea and the Tyrrhenian Sea to reach the Strait of Gibraltar. They can't do that anymore. Now, any Russian rescue ships are going to have to sail all around Europe to get to the Novorossiysk. Even assuming that Russia could easily reach its malfunctioning submarine, it may not have the parts needed to carry out a repair. Logically, you would assume that any submarine deployed into the world's waters would have parts to fix something as vital as the fuel system, as well as an expert on board who knows how to use those parts. The Novorossiysk apparently has neither, indicating that Western sanctions and Russia's own poor training of its naval personnel are hurting Russia far more than Putin wanted the world to know. The Novorossiysk may have just revealed a secret that Putin would have rather kept. In truth, there were plenty of doubts about the prowess of Russia's navy long before the Novorossiysk was forced to surface with its fuel problem. Back in August 2024, the national interest referred to Russia's navy as a paper tiger, a force that had long been overestimated, even before Ukraine's destruction of so much of the Black Sea Fleet exposed its weaknesses. The same outlet way back in 2019 also noted that Russia wasn't able to replace its old submarines anywhere near as fast as it needed to. This problem was particularly impacting Russia's nuclear submarines, the outlet said. However, the Kilo class, of which the Novorossiysk is a part, was struggling as well. This diesel-electric fleet isn't in much better shape, with most of Russia's 17 Kilo-class hunter-killers dating to the early 1990s, the national interest noted. Bear in mind that these issues with building more submarines, which may have stemmed from a lack of technical expertise, a lack of parts, or both, were apparent over 6 years ago. Add the attrition of the Ukraine war and Western sanctions into the mix. Perhaps it's no wonder that Russia has submarines with malfunctioning fuel systems and lost panels deployed right now. Let's assume that the Novorossiysk ends up succumbing to its technical faults and ends up as little more than a metal carcass buried deep within NATO's naval backyard. What will that mean for Russia and its attempts to project power against NATO going forward? Russia will lose its submarine presence in the Mediterranean, for one. It was only in January that Naval News reported that the loss of the Syrian port of Tartus meant that Russia had no more submarines in the Mediterranean. The last of its subs in the region left on January 2nd, the outlet claimed, likely because they no longer use the Syrian port as a home base. Perhaps this tells us a little more about why the Novorossiysk was sailing through the Strait of Gibraltar rather than operating in the Black Sea as it's supposed to. Russia may have been sending the submarine into NATO's backyard, or more worryingly, the Novorossiysk may have been operating in the Mediterranean Sea for several months and was on its way back to port. The submarine's threat may have been there for a long time. That's the point, as we explained earlier. Russia needed to maintain a Mediterranean submarine presence, even with the loss of Tartus. Now it knows how vital that port was to its goal of intimidating NATO's coastal Mediterranean members. The only question left to answer is what happens next. That's difficult to determine. Russia will likely try to send ships to the Strait of Gibraltar, though it will still need permission from either Spain or Morocco to pass through. The former is a NATO member, while the latter became the first African state to send military assistance to Ukraine in December 2022. Morocco has since taken a more neutral stance, but this still means that Russia will have to sail into unfriendly waters to salvage its submarine. Maybe it won't bother. Putin has let a submarine crew die a collectively avoidable death before when he prevented anybody else from helping the crew on board the Kursk. We could be about to see a repeat of that tragedy. Russia may end up finding it tough to get any support from NATO nations after the tricks it's been pulling throughout September. After a series of drone and fighter jet incursions into NATO territory, Poland has had enough. Warsaw warns it will shoot down Russian jets, and the Kremlin vows war in response. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering Putin's latest international humiliations. And thank you as always for watching.